It was already hot when I rolled out of bed. Not surprising, it was July, and in this part of Florida, summer mornings didn't waste any time heating up. The little fan on the dresser hummed uselessly, pushing around air that felt thick enough to chew. My room was barely big enough for the mattress I shared with my little sister, Emma. She was curled up on her side, snoring softly, one hand clutching her raggedest stuffed rabbit. I tried not to wake her as I tiptoed to the door. The first sound I heard outside wasn't birds or cars or anything like that. It was Mom's coughing. The hacking, wet sound cut through the stillness of the house like a knife. It always started like this, morning after morning for as long as I could remember. But lately, it seemed worse. More frequent. Louder. I knew Mom was sick. Sick in a way that wasn't like a cold or the flu. It was something bigger, scarier. She never told me exactly what was wrong, and I didn't ask. I guess I didn't want to know. I stood by her bedroom door for a second, listening to her cough. When it finally stopped, I poked my head in. "You okay, Mom?" Her voice was raspy, but she still managed a smile. "Morning, Alex. I'm fine, sweetheart. Don't you worry about me." But I did worry. A lot. Mom was lying on the couch in the corner of her room, surrounded by papers. Bills, mostly. There were always bills. Sometimes I'd catch her staring at them like they were monsters she didn't know how to fight. I didn't say anything else. I just nodded and went to grab my bucket and sponge from the closet. My sign, "Car Wash, $5, was folded up on top of the fridge, where Emma couldn't reach it. "Going to work again?" Mom called after me as I headed for the door. "Yeah," I said. "I'll bring back lunch." She didn't argue. She never did. Out on the street, the sun was already high, beating down on the cracked pavement. My feet were bare because my sneakers had holes, and wearing them made my toes hurt. I didn't mind, though. The sidewalk was warm, not hot enough to burn yet. I cut through the empty lot next to Mrs. Patel's grocery store. It smelled like spilled beer and old trash, but it was the best spot I'd found. Lots of cars, lots of people in a hurry. And sometimes, if I was lucky, tips. I set up my little operation under the shade of a scraggly tree that was just barely taller than me. Bucket, sponge, sign. Ready to go. The first car rolled up about 20 minutes later. A silver Honda with a man in a baseball cap behind the wheel. "You washing cars, kid?" he asked, leaning out the window. "Yep." $5, I said, holding up my sign. He smiled and handed me a crumpled 10. "Make it extra shiny, yeah." "Deal," I said. As I worked, scrubbing away dirt and bird poop, I thought about Mom. About her cough, the way she was always so tired. About how the bills kept piling up. I couldn't fix any of it. Not really. But at least I could do this. At least I could try. By the time I finished the Honda, I'd earned my first tip of the day. The man gave me a thumbs up as he drove off, a smile on his face. I tucked the $10 bill into the pocket of my shorts, feeling a tiny spark of relief. $10 wasn't much, but it was something. I didn't have to wait long for my next customer. Cars kept coming, some dirtier than others, some drivers more generous. A woman in a minivan handed me exact change, not even a penny more, while a guy in a pickup truck tossed me a 20 and told me to "Keep the change, kid." By noon, the heat was unbearable. My shirt was soaked with sweat, my feet dusty and sore from walking back and forth on the hot pavement. I paused to drink some water from the plastic bottle I'd brought along, wiping my forehead with the back of my hand. That's when Mrs. Patel came out of her store. She was a kind woman, always wearing brightly colored dresses and a gold chain that glinted in the sun. She waved at me as she approached, carrying a small bag. "Alex," she said, her voice warm. "You've been out here all morning. Have something to eat. I shook my head. It's okay, Mrs. Patel. I'm not hungry. Her eyes narrowed in that way adults do when they know you're lying. Nonsense. Here. She handed me the bag, and I couldn't help but peek inside. There was a sandwich, a banana, and a juice box. I hesitated. I don't have money to pay you back. She smiled, reaching out to brush a bit of soap suds off my arm. You've been working hard. This is my treat, okay? Don't argue. Okay, I said quietly, clutching the bag. As she walked back to the store, I sat down under my tree and tore into the sandwich. Peanut butter and jelly. Simple, but it tasted like heaven after hours of scrubbing cars in the sun. For a moment, I let myself relax. But only for a moment. Because as soon as I finished, I was back on my feet, sign in hand. Mom needed me to keep going. Emma needed me to keep going. The next car that pulled up was a sleek black Mercedes. A fancy one, the kind that looked like it belonged in a movie. The window rolled down, and a man with a perfectly trimmed beard and sunglasses leaned out. $5 for a wash. Yes, sir, I said, my voice steady. He looked me over, from my sweaty face to my bare feet. Then he nodded. All right, kid. Let's see what you've got. As I got to work, scrubbing the shiny surface of the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that this man was different. Something about the way he watched me, arms crossed, like he was thinking about something more than just his car. I didn't know it yet, but this was the moment my life was about to change. The Mercedes was spotless when I finished. I'd scrubbed every inch of it, even polishing the rims with the cleanest part of my rag. My arms ached, and the sun felt like it was burning a hole straight through me, but I didn't stop until it gleamed. The man stepped out of the car and walked around it, inspecting my work. He didn't say anything for a moment, just ran a finger along the hood. Finally, he looked at me, pushing his sunglasses up onto his head. Not bad, kid, he said. Thanks, I replied, trying to sound confident, even though I was dead tired. He pulled out his wallet, and I braced myself for the usual $5 or $10. But instead, he handed me a crisp $50 bill. My eyes went wide. Are you serious? Yeah, he said, sliding his wallet back into his pocket. You earned it. I stood there, staring at the bill, my brain struggling to process what just happened. $50. That was more than I made in a whole week of car washes. Thank you, I stammered, clutching the money like it might disappear if I didn't hold on tight. He nodded, then tilted his head, studying me for a second. What's your name? Alex, I said. Alex Carter. Well, Alex, he said, leaning against the side of his car. You're a hard worker. Not many kids your age would be out here doing this. I shrugged, unsure of what to say. My mom's sick, I blurted out. She can't work, so I help out. The words hung in the air, and I immediately wished I could take them back. I didn't like telling strangers about Mom or our situation. It felt too personal, too raw. The man didn't say anything right away. He just nodded, his expression unreadable. That's a lot for a kid to take on, he said finally. I shrugged again, trying to play it off. It's not a big deal. He smiled, but there was something thoughtful behind it, like he was turning an idea over in his head. Well, Alex, keep at it. You've got a good head on your shoulders. With that, he got back into his car, started the engine, and drove off. I stood there, still holding the 50, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Relief, because this money would go a long way. Pride, because he'd called me a hard worker. And something else, something I couldn't quite name. As I watched the Mercedes disappear down the street, I had no idea that wasn't the last I'd see of him. Or that he wasn't done changing my life. The rest of the day was a blur of cars and sweat. After the man in the Mercedes drove off, I had a steady stream of customers. A few of them were regulars, people who came by every few days and knew my name. Others were new faces, some kind, others in a rush, tossing cash at me like I was just part of the scenery. By the time the sun started dipping low in the sky, my arms felt like jelly, and my legs ached from standing all day. But my pocket was heavier than it had been in weeks. I packed up my bucket, sponge, and sign, my heart lifting a little as I counted the bills. $75. That was more than enough to grab dinner for Mom and Emma and still set some aside for the rent. On my way home, I stopped by Mrs. Patel's again. She was inside, rearranging cans of soup on the shelves. When she saw me, she smiled. "Finished for the day, Alex?" "Yeah," I said, pulling a $5 bill from my pocket. "Can I get some bread, a can of chicken soup, and, maybe a candy bar for Emma?" Mrs. Patel nodded, taking the money. But instead of just the bread and soup, she slid a couple of extra cans and a small bag of apples into the bag. "For your family," she said before I could protest. I didn't argue. I'd learned it was pointless to try and talk Mrs. Patel out of being generous. "Thank you," I said quietly, slinging the bag over my shoulder. When I got home, the house was dim and quiet. Mom was still on the couch, her eyes closed but not quite asleep. Emma was sitting cross-legged on the floor, coloring in one of the old books we'd found at a thrift store. "Guess what I brought?" I said, holding up the bag. Emma's face lit up. "Candy?" "Yup. And dinner." She jumped up and hugged me, and for a moment, the weight of the day didn't feel so heavy. I made the soup while Emma ate her candy bar, and Mom tried to get up to help but couldn't make it past the couch. She smiled weakly at me, her face pale. "Thank you, Alex," she said as I handed her a bowl. I nodded, not trusting myself to say anything. After dinner, I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. The man in the Mercedes kept popping into my head. The way he'd looked at me, like he saw something more than just a tired kid with a bucket. I wondered if I'd ever see him again. As it turned out, I wouldn't have to wait long. The next morning was cooler, the kind of weather that felt like a small gift after weeks of sweltering heat. I got up early, slipping out before Emma stirred and before Mom started coughing. I grabbed my usual gear, bucket, sponge, sign, and headed to my spot near Mrs. Patel's grocery store. Business was slower that day. Maybe it was the weather, or maybe everyone had already washed their cars for the week. By noon, I'd only washed 2 cars, and both drivers had barely tipped. My stomach growled, and I took a sip from my water bottle, trying to ignore the tightness in my chest. That's when I saw it. The black Mercedes. It pulled into the lot, smooth and quiet, like it owned the place. My heart skipped a beat. The same man from yesterday stepped out, looking just as sharp in his pressed shirt and sunglasses. "Hey, Alex," he said, waving like we were old friends. "Hi," I said, trying not to sound as nervous as I felt. "Busy day?" he asked, glancing at my empty spot under the tree. "Not really," I admitted. He nodded, then gestured toward his car. "Think you've got time to wash mine again?" "Sure," I said, grabbing my sponge. "But it doesn't even look dirty." He laughed. "Humor me." As I worked, he leaned against the car, watching me the same way he had yesterday. It was a little unsettling, but I kept my head down, focusing on the job. When I finished, he handed me another $50 bill. "Thanks," I said, trying not to let my shock show. He smiled, then crouched down so we were eye level. "Can I ask you something, Alex?" Sure," I said, wiping my hands on my shorts. "What's your plan?" he asked, his tone serious. I blinked. "Plan? For the future," he clarified. "You're obviously a hard worker, and you've got a good head on your shoulders. But you can't wash cars forever. So what's your plan? I didn't know what to say. No one had ever asked me that before. I didn't have a plan. My whole life was about getting through the day, about helping Mom and taking care of Emma. I don't know, I admitted. He nodded, like he'd expected that answer. Well, Alex, I've got an idea. But only if you're interested. I stared at him, my heart racing. What kind of idea? He smiled, standing up and brushing off his pants. How about we talk over lunch? My treat. I hesitated, glancing toward Mrs. Patel's store. I wasn't used to strangers offering me things, and part of me wanted to say no. But there was something about the way he spoke, so calm and confident, like he wasn't going to let me down. Okay, I said finally. He grinned and opened the passenger door of his car. Hop in. As I slid into the plush leather seat, I couldn't help but wonder what I'd just gotten myself into. The Mercedes smelled like leather and some kind of fancy cologne. It was a world away from the sweaty parking lot where I spent my days. I sat stiffly in the passenger seat, gripping my bucket like it might fall out of my lap. The man glanced at me as he pulled out of the lot. Relax, Alex. You're not in trouble. I nodded, though my shoulders stayed tense. Where are we going? There's a diner a few blocks away, he said. They make a mean burger. You like burgers? Yeah, I said quietly. He smiled and turned onto the main road. I watched the world blur by through the window, trying to make sense of what was happening. Who was this guy? Why was he so interested in me? We pulled into a small diner with a red and white sign that looked like it had been there forever. The parking lot was half full, and the smell of fried food hit me the second I opened the car door. Inside, the place was cozy and crowded, with checkered tablecloths and a waitress who greeted the man like she knew him. Hey, Mr. Carter, she said, her voice warm. Hey, Brenda, he replied. Can we grab a booth in the back? She nodded, grabbing 2 menus and leading us to a corner booth. I slid in across from him, still clutching my bucket. You can put that down, you know, he said, motioning to the bucket. I hesitated, then set it on the floor next to me. All right, he said, leaning back in his seat. Let's get to it. First, I should introduce myself. My name's David Carter. Carter? I echoed. Yeah, he said, smiling. Same last name as you. Maybe we're long-lost cousins. I managed a small laugh, though I doubted it. People like him didn't have long-lost cousins who washed cars in parking lots. So, Alex, he said, resting his arms on the table. Tell me about yourself. There's not much to tell, I said, shrugging. He raised an eyebrow. Try me. I hesitated, then told him the basics. About Mom being sick, about Emma, about how I started washing cars to help make ends meet. I didn't go into too much detail, but he listened like every word mattered. When I finished, he nodded thoughtfully. You've had a tough run of it, he said. But you've got guts. That's something not everyone has. I didn't know what to say, so I just stared at the table. Brenda came by with 2 glasses of water, and David ordered burgers and fries for both of us before turning his attention back to me. Here's the thing, Alex, he said. I see potential in you. You're hardworking, resourceful, and willing to do whatever it takes to help your family. Those are rare qualities. I blinked at him, unsure where he was going with this. I run a few businesses, he continued. Small ones, mostly. But I've been thinking about starting something new, and I could use someone like you. Someone I can trust. Someone who knows what hard work really means. My stomach flipped. You mean, a job? Exactly, he said, smiling. Not just washing cars. Something bigger. But it's up to you. If you're interested, we can work out the details. I opened my mouth to respond, but Brenda returned with our food, setting a massive burger and a plate of fries in front of me. My stomach growled loudly, and David chuckled. "Think it over," he said, picking up his burger. "No rush." As I bit into the burger, the best thing I'd tasted in weeks, my mind raced. Was this real? Could I trust him? Part of me wanted to say yes right then and there. But another part, the part that had spent years watching every penny and guarding every ounce of hope, wasn't so sure. I ate in silence for a few minutes, the burger disappearing faster than I realized. The fries were crisp, golden, and perfect, and I had to remind myself not to wolf them down too quickly. Across the table, David sipped his water, giving me time to process what he'd said. When my plate was nearly empty, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "So, Alex," he said, his tone casual but curious. "What do you think?" I hesitated, wiping my hands on a napkin. "I don't know," I admitted. It sounds amazing. But why me? You don't even know me." David nodded, like he'd been expecting the question. "Fair point. Let me explain." He leaned back, folding his arms. "When I was your age, I was in a tough spot too. My dad wasn't around, and my mom worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. I used to mow lawns to help out. One day, a guy noticed me hustling, doing more than just the bare minimum. He offered me a job at his hardware store. It wasn't much, but it was a start. That job changed my life, Alex. It showed me what I was capable of." I stared at him, trying to picture David as a kid like me. It was hard to imagine, but the way he spoke, I believed him. "I see a lot of myself in you," he continued. "And I know what it's like to feel stuck, to want something better but not know how to get there. That's why I want to help. Because someone once did the same for me." His words hit me hard. No one had ever talked to me like this before, like I was worth investing in. "But what kind of job is it?" I asked cautiously. "I was thinking we'd start small," he said. "You could help me with one of my businesses. It's a car detailing shop, not far from here. You've already got experience washing cars, so it's a natural fit. We'd pay you hourly, and you'd learn some skills along the way." Hourly pay. Skills. It sounded too good to be true. "What about my mom?" I asked. "She needs me at home." David nodded. "Family comes first. If you need time off to take care of her, that's no problem. I'm not here to make your life harder, Alex. I want to make it easier." I looked down at the table, my thoughts swirling. Part of me wanted to jump at the chance, but another part held back. What if it didn't work out? What if he changed his mind? "Think about it," David said, sensing my hesitation. "You don't have to decide right now. But if you're interested, come by the shop tomorrow. Here's the address." He slid a small card across the table. I picked it up, staring at the neat handwriting. "Thank you," I said softly, slipping the card into my pocket. David smiled. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, Alex. Whatever you decide, I know you'll do great." When we left the diner, he dropped me off back at Mrs. Patel's. As I got out of the car, he handed me another $50 bill. "For the hard work," he said with a wink. I watched his Mercedes drive away, the card burning a hole in my pocket. This could be the break I'd been waiting for. But it felt like a huge leap, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to take it. I walked home slowly, my bucket in one hand and the $50 bill clutched tightly in the other. The weight of David's offer hung over me, heavier than any bucket of water I'd ever carried. When I opened the door to our tiny apartment, Emma ran up to me, her face lighting up. "Alex! Look what I drew." She held up a piece of paper covered in bright, scribbled flowers. "Do you like it?" "It's amazing," I said, ruffling her hair. Mom was still on the couch, her face pale but her smile warm. "Hey, sweetheart. You were gone longer than usual." I set the bucket down and pulled the card from my pocket, turning it over in my hands. "Yeah. Something weird happened." Mom frowned, trying to sit up straighter. "Weird how?" I told her everything. About David coming back, about the diner, and finally about the offer. As I spoke, her expression shifted from curiosity to something softer, something that looked a lot like pride. "That's incredible, Alex," she said when I finished. "But what do you think?" "I don't know," I admitted, sitting down on the floor next to Emma. "It sounds amazing, but what if it doesn't work out? What if it's too much?" Mom reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she brushed a strand of hair from my face. "You've been carrying so much on your shoulders, Alex. More than any 10-year-old should have to. But this man, David, he sounds genuine. Maybe this is your chance to let someone else help for a change." Her words sank in slowly. I'd been so focused on being the one to fix everything that I hadn't even considered what it would mean to have help. Emma leaned her head against my arm, her little voice breaking the silence. "Are you gonna do it, Alex?" I looked down at her hopeful eyes and the trust in her tiny face. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to grab the chance with both hands and never let go. But there was still that little voice in the back of my head, whispering doubts. "I don't know yet," I said finally. "But I'll think about it." Mom smiled softly. "That's all you can do, sweetheart. Just think about it." That night, as I lay in bed staring at the cracked ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about David's offer. About his words, his confidence, the way he'd looked at me like I was worth something more. Maybe, just maybe, this was my chance to change everything. And maybe tomorrow, I'd find out if I was brave enough to take it. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. The apartment was still quiet, the soft hum of the fridge the only sound. Mom was asleep on the couch, her breathing shallow but steady. Emma had curled up next to her during the night, clutching her blanket like it was a treasure. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the small card David had given me. His handwriting was neat, professional, the address written with precision. My stomach twisted. What if this was a mistake? What if he was just being nice, and I wasn't really cut out for anything more than washing cars? But then I thought about Mom, her tired eyes and the weight she carried every day. I thought about Emma, drawing flowers on scraps of paper because we couldn't afford real coloring books. This wasn't just about me. By the time the sun had started creeping through the blinds, I'd made up my mind. I scribbled a quick note for Mom, letting her know where I was going, and slipped out the door. The walk to the address on the card wasn't far. The streets were still waking up, and the air was cool and crisp. When I turned the corner, I saw it, a neat little building with a sign that read, "Carter's Auto Detailing." My heart pounded as I walked up to the door. Inside, the place smelled like soap and polish, and the floors gleamed. A couple of guys were working on a car, their laughter filling the air as they scrubbed and buffed. "Alex." I turned to see David walking toward me, a grin on his face. He was wearing a polo shirt and jeans, looking more relaxed than the day before. "You came," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "I had a feeling you would." "Yeah," I said, my voice shaky. "I wanted to see what this was all about." "Fair enough," he said, gesturing for me to follow him. He led me through the shop, explaining what they did, detailing, paint touch-ups, interior cleaning. "It's not glamorous," he said, "but it's honest work. And if you're willing to learn, there's room to grow." I nodded, taking it all in. The shop was clean, organized, and everyone seemed to know what they were doing. It was a far cry from my parking lot setup. David stopped in front of a small office, turning to face me. "So, what do you think?" I hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I think I'd like to try." His smile widened. Good answer. Let's get you started. The rest of the day was a blur. David introduced me to the team, showed me how to handle some of the equipment, and even let me help with a car. It was hard work, but it felt different, better somehow. Like I was part of something bigger. By the time the day ended, I was exhausted but lighter than I'd felt in months. David handed me an envelope before I left. "Your first day's pay," he said with a wink. I opened it when I got home, my hands shaking. Inside was $80, more than I'd ever made washing cars in a single day. When I showed Mom, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm so proud of you, Alex," she said, her voice cracking. For the first time in a long time, I felt proud of myself too. And for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. Over the next few weeks, my life changed in ways I never thought possible. Every morning, I woke up early, grabbed my bucket out of habit, and headed to Carter's auto detailing. By the time I got there, David and the team would already be working, music playing softly in the background as they transformed beat-up cars into something shiny and new. At first, I was nervous, scared I'd mess up or wouldn't be able to keep up. But David was patient, showing me the ropes one step at a time. The other workers, guys with years of experience, were surprisingly kind. They didn't laugh when I asked questions or needed help. "You're learning fast, kid," one of them said one day, clapping me on the back. "Keep it up." Each day, I brought home an envelope with my pay. It wasn't just money, it was a lifeline. Mom stopped worrying so much about which bills to pay first. Emma got a real coloring book and a pack of crayons, her face lighting up like it was Christmas morning. One evening, David showed up at our apartment unannounced. I opened the door, startled to see him standing there with a bag of groceries in one hand and a big grin on his face. "Thought you could use a little extra," he said, stepping inside before I could argue. Mom tried to protest, but David waved her off. "It's nothing," he said. "Just a thank you for raising such a great kid." I don't think I'd ever seen Mom cry like that. As the days turned into months, things started to feel different. Better. I wasn't just earning money, I was learning skills, gaining confidence, and dreaming about a future I hadn't dared to imagine before. One afternoon, David pulled me aside in the shop. "I've been thinking," he said, his tone serious. I swallowed hard, wondering if I'd done something wrong. "I want to expand," he said, a smile creeping onto his face. "Open another location. And when I do, I want you to be part of it, not just as an employee, but as someone in charge. What do you think?" I stared at him, stunned. "You mean, like a manager?" "Exactly," he said. "You've got the potential, Alex. I see it every day. And if you stick with it, who knows? One day, you might own a shop of your own." My heart felt like it might burst. I nodded, unable to find the words to say how much it meant. Looking back, I think about that first day when David pulled into the parking lot with his shiny black Mercedes. At the time, it felt like a random stroke of luck. But now I know it was more than that. It was proof that even the smallest actions, a car wash, a conversation, a $50 bill, can change a life forever. David didn't just give me a job. He gave me hope. And that hope rippled out, touching my family, my future, and everything I'd ever dreamed of. Sometimes, it takes just one person to see you, to believe in you, to remind you that you're worth more than you ever thought possible. For me, that person was David. And I'll never forget him.